Welcome back to This Green Earth. I'm Seth Arns.
And I'm Claire Wiley.
Today we welcome Charlotte Overby, who works as Vice President of Conservation Field Programs at Conservation Lands Foundation, a network of 84 community-based organizations working to protect public lands and improve federal land management. Executive orders and policy changes issued by the current administration seeks to open additional public lands to resource extraction, such as the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, and has rescinded the roadless rule. Welcome to the show, Charlotte.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
I wanted to start off just by hearing a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background, and how did you get interested working in public lands policy?
Well, thanks. That's a nice question to be asked to start off with. Like so many people, I was just a kid who wanted to be outside all the time. And as I grew up, I thought I am really not cut out to work in an office all the time. And I love nature and I loved being out and looking at animals and playing with the leaves and all the things that kids do. And so living in the West, I became aware of what public lands are, these vast, incredible places we have. And I thought, well, if I can apply some of my professional background and skills and time and energy to protecting these places, that's what I wanted to do. And I do work in an office, but I also still get out to see some of these amazing places. I have worked for the Conservation Lands Foundation now for 14 years. So it's been an incredible education for me.
That's great. And we love hearing the background of people and their path because it's similarly, a lot of people harken back to how they first felt with the outdoors and how they took it in and how it meant something to them. And I'm curious as to how in your foundation you define national conservation lands, and can we get a greater understanding of how they are managed?
Yes, I love talking about the National Conservation Lands because it is an incredible system of national monuments, wild and scenic rivers, national historic trails, wilderness areas that are all managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And it's an exciting, incredible system because these are really, truly special places that make the American West, the iconic West that we all think of. And it's a relatively young system. So the American people are just getting to know how special these places are. And the Bureau of Land Management is the largest land manager we have in this country. And so they have in their portfolio and their responsibility as our agency, the American People's Agency, to care for these places and make them accessible to us. These places are living cultural landscapes for many Native communities, for ranching families who may have been had permits to do this to graze cattle on these lands. They're places where people can go hunting and fishing. And our organization was founded 19 years ago to kind of grow up beside the National Conservation Lands as a system. We advocate for these places. We work to protect, restore, and expand the system. And we do that through working with local people who live near these places who know and love them the best. So it's been a very, it's a wonderful association we have with local communities, and we as a national organization try to harness some collective power and love for these places to ensure they're protected for generations to come.
Now, I was wondering if you could dive into that last part a little bit more. How exactly does the Conservation Lands Foundation work at this interface of public lands management?
Yes, as I mentioned, we are a national organization. So, but we're small and mighty. We're a staff of 22 people. And the interface we try to foster and culture and grow is between friends groups, so to speak. So, Friends of Red Rock, Grand Staircase Escalante Partners. These are all nonprofit organizations, locally based, regionally based, sometimes state based, that advocate and love and take care of and steward these places. So we call this the Friends Grassroots Network, which is this amazing network you referred to in your opening of about now we're up to almost 90 organizations that are very unique, very locally based, locally supported, but from time to time we can pull them together as a broad network and speak with one voice. So an example of that might be we may ask the network to speak with one voice when it comes to appropriating funds for the Bureau of Land Management. We may ask this network to contact their members of Congress and say, we need you as appropriators, as the ones that create the budget, to do this for the Bureau of Land Management. So they can speak with one voice, but also maintain their incredible expertise, contributions they make locally.
Can we turn our lens now onto the reserve in Alaska and the Western Arctic and learn little bit more about that landscape there? There's about 13 million acres, if I'm not mistaken, that are protected there in those special areas. Can you talk to us about that landscape and maybe some of the threats that they are facing now?
Yes, thank you for this question. I have been referring to the Bureau of Land Management as the biggest land management agency we have in this country, and the National Conservation Lands as their real flagship system. In Alaska, the Bureau of Land Management is responsible for more than 23 million acres of land belonging to the American people. And the 13 million you have referred to are truly special places, sacred lakes, incredible waterways, wetlands, places that are critical for migratory birds that visit almost every state in the lower 48. Caribou, some of the most incredible migrations of large animals on the continent. It's a spectacular place, and the reason we focus on it, even though we live down here in the lower 48 and that area seems so far away, is that the Arctic really is at the front lines of what we know is happening to our climate, species loss, and it's happening in a way that we can change if we find our political will to do that. And
Okay.
I
I'm
can
sorry,
talk
Seth. I
about that
didn't
if
know if
you'd like. I
Catherine
wasn't
wanted
sure.
to.
Now,
I didn't
now
know if you had a follow-up.
I wanted to uh, kind of clarify on what these specific lands are that are under threat in Alaska. I know in previous administrations, going back 10, 20 years, one of the
Mhm.
areas of land we heard a lot about that was under threat was Anwar, the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. And I was just
Mhm.
wondering if you could tell us what is that land under threat? Is this a different land? Just to clarify that for our listeners.
Yeah, yeah. Many people know about the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is a different area of Alaska. The lands I'm referring to are considered by many even more ecologically important and globally significant for its wildlife, for its wetlands, for its carbon sequestration. All of the things we know are important. And so we want to focus attention on that because it is facing a lot of threats from oil and gas development. And those have come and gone over the years. The Biden administration set aside 13 million acres as special areas. And in 2025, the Trump administration threw out that resource management plan and replaced it with one that opens 80% of that area to oil and gas development and leasing. And so the issue also became more compounded when Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, sorry, which stipulates that they have to hold 5 leases over the next 10 years. And each of those lease areas has to be 4 million acres in size. So the pressure now on that landscape to develop for fossil fuels is extraordinary and incredibly short-sighted given the value of this place to indigenous communities who rely on it, the wildlife and the ecosystem that are unique. And as I said, just globally significant in size and impact.
Now, just following up on that, do you have any sense of if these leases are offered, if there is tremendous interest in within the oil industry to develop these lands? It's very expensive and a very expensive proposition to develop oil wells and distribution networks in the Arctic. And I was wondering if you had a sense of that, if there is going to be an economic check and balance that maybe these aren't as attractive to oil companies as they could be.
Um, I can't speculate on the economic success a global, oil energy development company, fossil fuel company would find there. What I can say is that this is very much in a playbook that could be brought down to the lower 48. So, for example, if the Bureau of Land Management um, decides that in this resource management plan, they don't have to consider environmental impacts for every development site. The things they're trying to do with this new resource management plan could be brought to other areas. For example, up in Wyoming, they are reviewing and reopening a resource management planning process for 3.9 million acres, with similar intentions to open these places for vast and highly concentrated oil and gas development. And that is a completely short-sighted when you consider. I was looking for some statistics on renewable energy development and people's feelings about that. American people, no matter how they vote, approximately 74% of them would like to see more investment in renewables. So this kind of management approach is, I think, deeply out of step with what the American people want. It is sacrificing wildlife, habitat, indigenous cultures to very short-term fossil fuel profits. And I think that's the gist of where we are right now. Is that what we want to do for the generations that are going to come after us?
Right. Let's get into some of those outlooks on the questions of long-term impacts and what's happening with the climate now. So we're already facing a warming Arctic and it's moving at accelerated pacing, this warming. And now, if we're trying to protect these carbon sinks and keep this area from destruction, what are the long-term impacts when you combine that with human interaction and us going in there and building infrastructures?
Um, okay. I've got to think about this for a minute.
That's a big question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not a climate scientist, but I can certainly paint a picture of hope. I think um, I like to I like to put it this way. If I think about our grandfather, great grandfathers' generations who fought in the First and Second World Wars for democracy, for people's freedom, for the things that we now take advantage. I would like the generations that come after me now to look back and say, of our generation, we didn't give up hope. We were in this place of fear, real climate impacts happening to our forests, happening in our desert regions, but we didn't give up hope. And so I think that is what my message is that we can't get tired and feel worn down by what is happening right now, and particularly with this administration, they're intentionally seeking to kind of overwhelm the public with regulatory jargon, referring to obscure policies. But it's people who make policies and people who have to implement policies. And it's people who can speak up about how those are and should be. So my hope is that, people take the time to talk to elected officials and don't give up. Uh, you know, Participate in comment periods, which aren't exactly the most fun thing to do, but it's important work. And people have to find those small ways to engage in public processes we have available to us. And
Right. And sorry, I'm so sorry. Do you want to
that's
keep
okay.
going?
Well, I would, and the goal, I mean, the purpose for doing this is to speak for things that don't have a voice. Nature, wildlife, clean air and clean water. We have to speak for these things. And again, do that with generations to come at top of mind. They will thank us for not giving up.
Right. What are some of those conservation strategies? What are some of those conservation strategies that you would like to see put forth to help protect these areas?
I think one of the best strategies we can really embrace is the fact that no matter how you vote or how you happen to feel about Congress at the moment, most Americans will say they love nature, they think it's important, they want clean air, and they want clean water. So one strategy is to unite people around stewardship of public lands. Earlier, as we were talking, I was mentioning these friends groups, these local organizations. They are experts, love these places. They work alongside Bureau of Land Management rangers and biologists to steward these places, build trails, do water sampling. I think that kind of work is absolutely important. And that is one strategy around uniting people around the value and the things about particularly the American West, public lands in Utah that unite us, that we all really love. And it takes effort to kind of push aside maybe your own politics or rhetoric that we hear to do that. But getting out on the land with people to care for it is profound.
Now, we spent a bit of time talking about lands up in Alaska. What are some of the challenges facing public lands and public land management in the lower 48?
Yes, public lands in the lower 48 are in this moment experiencing all kinds of threats and challenges. From ones that are familiar to us, such as just urban growth, suburban sprawl, things like fires that are now, I know they're burning, in Colorado and especially in Utah. Those things that are familiar to us. Other challenges, I think, are the fact that we do have this Department of Interior and several agencies in charge of managing them. And it can be quite overwhelming to figure out how can one person get involved in a land management process. That sounds daunting. And it can be, but it can also be broken down into very, digestible ways to get engaged. It can start with a local Forest Service office, a local Bureau of Land Management office, and finding out when are your next lease sales? When can the public comment on these potential sales? You can do things like that. You can go to forums for county commissioners or that members of Congress may hold and ask them, what are you doing about public land management? Are you supporting appropriations and proper budgeting and funding for these agencies? You can ask those kinds of pointed questions as a way of uh, getting involved. So the threats are many, and they're happening around development, they're happening around growth, they're happening around climate change and fire. Um, you know, species populations are suffering. And so the threats are many. I think my job is to find those ways, those pathways people can take to making that small difference that every single person is capable of doing.
Now, there was one more recent change in federal lands management that I wanted to talk about, and that's the roadless rule. That's a rule that's been in place since the late 1990s, I believe, that has barred the development of new roads in areas without roads. That rule has been rescinded. I believe if there aren't lawsuits in the courts now, there probably will be. But I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the impacts of rescinding that rule, assuming that is in fact enacted.
Yes, the roadless rule and its counterpart with the Bureau of Land Management, which is called the Public Lands Rule, those are both really designed to um, keep wild public lands the way they are, which in the roadless rule case does prevent roads through wilderness areas, roads through wilderness study areas, roads through very special places. And when we develop roads in those kinds of places, all sorts of cascading effects then happen. There's erosion, there's incursion of people, which often leads to more fires. Um, Fires tend to start in areas where there are roads and people have access to. Um, it disrupts migration corridors. Roads block, literally block certain kinds of corridors, disrupt the habits of wildlife. And those things tend to ripple. If you kind of think of the classic metaphor of a web, that a road is a major pluck to that web, and it kind of bounces and shakes the whole system. Um, in the case of the Bureau of Land Management, the public lands rule was also rescinded, and a wonderful rule because it actually made conservation a multiple use. That is something it's a little stay with me on multiple use. The Bureau of Land Management, they have a mission to manage our public lands for multiple uses. Oil and gas development, that things that we rely on. Recreation is one of them. Cultural values is one of them. And that rule made conservation a value that the Bureau of Land Management needed to manage for. That has also been rescinded. So we have yet to see what the administration is putting forward to replace the roadless rule or the public lands rule. So we are in this place of what is coming next. I think people in the conservation space um, are going to not just want to put it back, but think of something that serves people even better. These are living landscapes. These are important for the future. They are important for some people's livelihoods. What can we do to not just put back the old, but get better? And I am because I focus so much on the Bureau of Land Management. I'm not as familiar with the roadless rule because that's a Forest Service rule. And so I'm just bringing that to your attention as you edit this together. That's why I kind of pulled in the public lands rule piece there.
All well said. I You had talked about how we can continue forward with hope and how hope ripples out and hopefully affects the generations after us. And you and your organization have created tools for individuals. You even have field trips that people can go on, but you also have this thing called the Climate Atlas that you link to. Can we go through that tool a little bit and how it can be utilized for people to understand what's happening in their own states and areas?
Yes, the Climate Atlas was a project we undertook about 4 or 5 years ago in partnership with another nonprofit called Conservation Science Partners. And the goal was to create an ArcGIS based mapping tool that regular people can use. You don't have to be an ArcGIS expert, somebody talented in that area to actually apply some layers to a map, push and pull some buttons, and really understand what's happening on a landscape. And so the tool has things like, okay, who manages this area? Is this largely forest or desert ecosystem? Huh, what kind of species are here? Oh, it's a hotspot for migration. Interesting. And so you can layer maps of public lands near where you live. And it was really designed to help local people, perhaps those involved in these friends groups, organizations, be able to even show elected officials why a place next door to their town was so important. It's like, oh, we know this family has, there's families here who have been grazing cattle here for generations. That's been a side-by-side complementary use to protecting the habitat. They can build science-based arguments for why places should be protected, why they're important for wildlife and for people. It's a really it's a layperson's tool to understand public land management and the potential and the opportunities for protecting large areas and giving them special designations for certain kinds of activities or uses.
And it is user accessible, which is really great if you wanted to get on there and poke around. And I was doing so in Utah just to better understand our landscape. So it really is an educational tool. And also, I think what's great about things that you have mentioned with your foundation is that you work very closely with Indigenous peoples. Can you tell me why it's so important to understand land from that perspective?
Yes, and I am not speaking as an Indigenous person, but I can say from our partnerships and the values we hold as an organization that, all public lands belong to all Americans, and all public lands were first inhabited by Native people on this continent. And in our view, to really be good stewards and to protect these places for the future, to keep them as they are, Indigenous voices are critical in those decision makings, in that process. They bring a perspective that is so deep. And that's why our partnerships are so important in that realm. Public lands are tribal lands. And to have that perspective in management decisions today is only going to um, make those places and those cultural identities and the opportunities and the promise that those lands hold even stronger for future generations.
Beth, did you have any last questions?
Maybe just finally, if you could finish up the interview with just telling our listeners a little bit about how people can get involved with protecting their public lands, with having an influence on public land policy.
Sure. Um, I would, okay, let me think about this for a second so I don't, I get too weird and I'll go on forever on this realm. So let me just make this short and tidy and a wrap up here. Uh, okay. There are many ways for people who love public lands, who love nature, who care about these things to get involved. The easy way is to find your local friends group, an organization in your area where you might want to volunteer and be helpful. You can visit conservationlands.org, which is the website of the organization I work for. We have an email list and can alert you to all kinds of developments in public land management, what's happening on the national scale, and there are action tools in there to reach out to members of Congress. And then finally, I would say, we all, in order to keep our hope and our love for these places alive, we've got to go outside. And that can be, your favorite neighborhood walk, or it can be a nice excursion out into some incredible wild place. Whatever that means for you, it's really important to intentionally get out in nature, see it, be reminded of why we love it, and let that lift you and carry you on.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Charlotte Overby. Appreciate you joining This Green Earth.
Thank
Yes,
you. It's been
thank
really
you.
nice to be here, and thank you to your listeners as well.
Yeah, we appreciate your time here on This Green Earth. And you mentioned your website. Can you say that one more time? And we will also put a link for it up here on our website, and that will go up later today.
Yes, the link to the Conservation Lands Foundation is conservationlands.org.
Wonderful. Charlotte Overby, who is working. What is your title again? I didn't have it written down here. I would like to give you a proper outro. Can you give her a proper outro, Seth?
Yes, Charlotte Overby, thank you for joining us today. Charlotte is Vice President of Conservation Field Programs at the Conservation Lands Foundation.